Hello everyone, this is the pilot episode of a new podcast that we're calling Audiobookish. The purpose of the podcast basically is to talk about audiobooks and just share our enjoyment of this storytelling format. My name is Fahed. You might have heard me from other such podcasts as Inconstant and See Through Panel, and my co-host for this podcast is Poppy Knight. Poppy, would you like to just give a brief intro to our listeners, to yourself?
Hiya, I'm Poppy, and this is my first podcast, so you won't know me from any podcast before, but I'm excited about it. It should be good. I'm another publishing hopeful, hoping to break into the industry and love audiobooks as well as other formats, but definitely do love audiobooks, so that's me.
Okay, and what we're planning on doing today is just talk about 5 audiobooks that we've really enjoyed. So, do you want to go first, Poppy, or do you want me to give my yes, if you can go first, yeah.
Sure. So I've it's always difficult to pick favourites, isn't it? But I've gone with 3 that are kind of all-time favourites, and then 2 that maybe aren't necessarily favourites, but they're 2 that I've listened to recently and really enjoyed. So yes. My top one would have to be The Boy Who Could Fly, which is written by Sally Gardner and read by Andrew Sachs. And this is definitely one of the ones that got me into audiobooks. So I used to listen to it before I went to sleep at night. This is a children's book, so I have no idea how old I was, but pretty young. Probably too young that I couldn't have read the print version anyway. So yes, used to listen before going to bed, listened in the car. I can put myself exactly like where we were, what I could see out the windows, the time when we actually finished it, because obviously I'd keep falling asleep before it ended. And that final scene, every time I hear that, it puts me right back in the car with my mum, and where we were heading to and stuff like that. It's a really lovely book. It's part of a series called Magical Children, and basically the main character in it is granted a wish by a fat fairy that comes to his door when he's having a really miserable birthday, really ill, in bed, and there's this fat fairy, and he doesn't really believe what's going on. He's just like, okay, whatever. And then it turns out he ends up being able to fly, and it really helps him and his whole family, and it's a really lovely story and beautifully read by Andrew Sachs.
So I had sort of a similar problem to it's always difficult choosing favourites. So I think most of the books that I've listed might not be my all-time favourites, but maybe the favourite ones that I've listened to this year. So my first one is, and it's in no particular order, it's Dadland by Kegi Carew. It's beautifully narrated by Kegi, Pippa Harwood, Robert Bathurst, Tom Golding, and Dermot Crowley. It's kind of one of the best books I've ever listened to. It's a biography of Kegi's dad, Tom Carew, who's this kind of maverick, mercurial figure. He's a secret agent, and he's kind of this, he's a sort of like social misfit. So he can't really function in like normal jobs. So that's why he became this spy, and it's a biography of kind of the missions that he went on, and kind of the really tumultuous and kind of difficult family dynamics caused by his personality, and kind of the difficulty that sort of Kegi also had with her mother. It's kind of beautifully written, and the narration is kind of, sometimes when you're listening to something, it's kind of got this almost fluid, smooth quality, and there's some really quite difficult stuff that's covered in the book, but it's, there's so much warmth underlying kind of the narration. It kind of makes it more palatable, but it's a really interesting read, and I really enjoyed it quite a lot.
Wow, yeah, that does sound really interesting.
So what's the next one on your list?
So the next one on my list I picked because, again, it's another childhood favourite, but I picked it because of its very specific audio nature. So it's You're a Bad Man, Mr. Gum by Andy Stanton, and he reads it on the audio. And the thing that's so brilliant about it is that the things that are specific to the visual and physical nature of the paperback, they then change for the audio. So there's a part where it goes like, but, and as you can hear, it's a big but, because he shouts it, where obviously like in the paperback, it's kind of this illustration of this big capital letters, B-U-T, which is great. And then there's this bit about there being blank pages at the end, but in the audio, it's there's loads of blank space on this CD. And I really, really love that, because I could totally see how some grumpy person would go, oh no, this isn't going to work for audio because there's too much visual stuff in it, and just leave it at that. And yet they've converted it and made it just a standalone, it's about the audio, it's about this. It's not just like a read version of a book, it is an audio CD story, which I just think is fabulous. I love it so much, and it gives so much ideas for other things, for other kids' books that are really visual, how you can make those audio would be great. So yeah, but it's also just really funny. Some people might find it a bit too daft, the kind of discussion of does random equal funny thing. It does toe the line on that, but I definitely think it does. And again, with audio, the sound effects they add in there are brilliant, just like perfectly well timed for the comedy and stuff. So it is fabulous. Yeah, and I love the audio so much that I actually only very recently bought the physical copy, and partly just to check that I was right about those things with the visual stuff and things like that. So, because I had the rest of the series in paperback for some reason, I don't know why, and hadn't had those in audio. I guess we didn't realise that they were out. So I need to definitely get those in audio, because yes, that is one of my absolute favourite audiobooks.
I think it's quite an interesting point you make there about how there's a lot of space and scope for kind of adaptation in audio, and kind of, how you translate words on the page into sounds, and kind of the different effects that you can kind of have there, and maybe sort of where the line is between audio book reading and audio play, and kind of how much you can kind of put in different acoustic elements before it becomes something else. So that sounds like quite an interesting adaptation of a book.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like that's something we're probably going to come up with again later on in this podcast, of different episodes and stuff, how they change it. Because you're never going to you can never translate something that's on the page to making it audio and it not have kind of someone's interpretation in it, or the way that they say a certain line or things like that. So, and at every stage there's always a how far on the spectrum between trying to be just replicating this to we're adapting it are you going to be. And obviously some books will be suited on different bits of that spectrum.
Yeah, there's a Audible adaptation of The Sandman, which is a really famous kind of seminal, really important graphic novel that I've heard wonderful things about. So I'm kind of, and that's basically, it's a visual storytelling. So it's going to be quite interesting to kind of see how they've actually managed to do that, because they've, Wolverine's got a podcast out, and that's, I say Wolverine, there's a podcast about Wolverine.
Yeah. Him himself sat down. Difficult controlling all the technology with those claws, but makes it good.
But they specifically wrote those stories for audio rather than trying to adapt something from it. So yes, I think that's something that I think we'll cover quite a bit. So my next one is The Icarus Deception by Seth Godin, narrated by Seth Godin. And this is so I quite like reading self-help and self-help books, kind of self-improvement books. And this is Seth Godin, he's a marketing genius. He's kind of one of these guys that business people go to understand how better to market their goods. He's one of the brainchilds about kind of having transparency in your marketing and your data, and how important storytelling is. So he's very much against random ads and stuff like that. So he's a really interesting guy. And basically the message of the book, it's about how in modern society we've only remembered half of the Icarus myth. So when we told the story of Icarus, we only repeat the part that says, "Don't fly too close to the sun."
Yeah.
Otherwise, the wax will melt. But there's another warning in the story, which is, "Don't fly too low because the wind currents won't reach under the sea waves, and you'll sink and you'll die." So it's kind of, by only focusing on the first part, we've kind of convinced ourselves one of the arguments he makes is we've convinced ourselves as a society not to be ambitious, not to take risks, not to reach for the goals that we really want to achieve. Where that's not what the story's about. The story's about, don't aim too high, but also don't aim too low. Try and find the middle path.
Yeah.
To kind of get to the journey that you want to do that, and that's going to involve taking some risks and avoiding some others. And Seth does. It's a book that really spoke to me at the time that I was listening to it. It's something I needed at the time. Is one of my lockdown listens. So it really touched me. And Seth's a fantastic narrator as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is really interesting point and very good point. And I feel like we can both identify with that very much at the moment with, trying to get into publishing.
Yeah.
And, you've got to be ambitious and go, what, actually, I do deserve this role that I'm applying for. And, I could get it. It could happen, even though, you've also got to be realistic about, making sure you've planned for if you don't get it and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, no. And did you find that kind of being told it in audio how did that compare to if you'd have read it, do you reckon?
So I think one of the reasons why I really enjoyed the book is that Seth's a really persuasive person to listen to, and if I was reading the words on the page, I'm not too sure my internal narrator, that the bloke that lives inside, one of the blokes that lives inside my head, would have been as convincing or as persuasive as Seth was. So yeah, I think it's quite it's a fascinating point you raised there, and kind of in terms of something you mentioned before about when you're reading something to yourself, what the voice inside your head sounds like, as opposed to when someone's narrating it. So I think it definitely had a stronger impact because Seth is really charismatic, and you can tell he really believes in what he's saying in the book as well.
Yeah, no, that's really good.
Yeah, what's your next one?
Yeah, so my next one, again, it's my last kind of childhood one, and again, it's because it's something different about audio that I really loved, as well as really loving the stories. So it's the audio adaptations of the His Dark Materials series, which is obviously now also got its own TV adaptation.
Yeah.
After the film and stuff. So it's unabridged, but it's dramatized. So it's got a different actor for every single character. And I'm pretty sure the only abridging is the occasional, he said, she said, that isn't necessary when you can hear them. So yeah, and the narration part is done by Philip Pullman himself. I just think that is brilliant. It's the first time I'd come across that. All other audiobooks that I'd listened to up until that point were, narrated by one person who would often do, great voices for different characters, but they weren't actually different people. And that one was, and I just think it's brilliant. It is kind of, everything you can want from a TV adaptation, including the amazing length of time. That means it can be just like what the book is. Just doesn't have the visuals, but then you can build those in your head because of how good all the acting is and stuff like that. So yeah, I also love it as an amazing story, but I mean, we'll spend way too long if I go analysing all 3 books in that series.
Yeah.
But yeah. And I was disappointed actually that therefore the new ones, so for the Book of Dust, that they didn't do the same thing. And I can see why, because obviously it's got to be quite expensive to hire that many different people and get Philip Pullman to be doing all the reading.
Yeah.
But I was disappointed because of how much of an impact those first 3 had on me by being in that format like that.
That's it's quite interesting that choice. It kind of reminds me of the BBC radio adaptations of some of Terry Pratchett's books, where they've got kind of this. It's almost a full cast, but a lot of those ones have been really, really abridged.
Yes.
So it's having an unabridged, almost audio play adaptation of a book sounds like something I haven't listened to those audiobooks. I read the books like
Yeah.
really, really, really long time ago.
Hmm.
Fantastic book. So maybe that's something that I'm probably going to have to add to.
Yeah, you definitely should. I always recommend when people ask for audiobook recommendation or they talk about His Dark Materials, I'm always, have you listened to the His Dark Materials audiobook? Because you need to. Yeah, it's really, really good. But don't get too disappointed about the fact that the Lyra character and then the Will character do change between books. Like they have different actors, and I remember that really annoying me when I first listened. But when you get a little bit into each book, you just go, okay, you can be Lyra. That's all right. Well, I'll let you be Lyra this time.
Okay, yeah. That sounds like a fantastic choice.
Yeah.
So my next one is Talk to Me by Dean Nelson, and it's narrated by Michael David Axtell. And this is, I think the blurb really kind of describes what the book is about. It's about how to ask better questions. So when I was initially starting in Constant, I wanted to understand how to, when I was interviewing someone, how to be better prepared and how to actually get the most out of the interview. And it's it contains a lot of like practical advice about how, as a journalist or a podcaster or an interviewer or just as a person in general, if you're having a conversation with someone, how to make that as fluid and as open as possible, so you're able to kind of get new information out of them and kind of better understand what their point of view is. There's, it's chock full of really interesting anecdotes about how he approached different interviews or how his students were able to get different interviews. And so Dean Nelson, he's a journalist and professor, and he's the founder of the Writers' Symposium by the Sea. And there's one anecdote which kind of stuck with me. It's about one of his students that was assigned to approach a family of someone that died in an airplane crash, and kind of the way she kind of is able to secure the interview and secure the quotes really kind of made me kind of step back and think about how I approach people. So it's if anyone's out there thinking about starting their own podcast or worried about job interviews or stuff like this, it's a fantastic book to read. It's brilliantly narrated by Michael David Axtell. He's got enough charisma and kind of gravitas to really bring kind of a real sense of importance to what's being said, while making it really accessible at the same time as well. So that's one of the audiobooks I recommend to anyone that's thinking about starting a podcast or a blog or wanting to go into marketing or anything. I think it really contains a lot of useful transferable lessons that I think everyone would be kind of well versed to kind of try and take on.
Wow, yeah, I think I'll have to add that to my list then and help prepare for this and stuff. That sounds really good.
Yeah. So what's I think, are we on your next choice now?
Yeah, my fourth one. So I've not been as diverse with you in that I've gone for all fiction things. But this one's slightly different because it's short stories. So this is Not So Stories, and it's sort of a reaction to Kipling's Just So Stories. So those ones about kind of, how animals got their distinguishing characteristic, kind of thing. But obviously, Kipling's views are very harmful, very outdated, various things like that, and a lot of them imbued in the text. And so for this one, I mean, the forward will explain it a lot better than I can, but they've invited writers of colour to write short stories kind of on that topic as a reaction to that, kind of anti-imperial, anti-colonial, anti-racist stories, and they're really, really brilliant. So you've got some that are kind of retellings or extensions of some of the original ones in Just So Stories, but then some that are just completely new, some that follow the same kind of format of how this animal became like this, but then some that are kind of modern day about people now. and things like that. So there's a whole range of stuff. There's some that are really dark and serious. There's some that are quite comedic. It's a huge mix, and obviously, you know, everyone's going to have some favourites more than others, but they were all really, really good. So yeah, and they'd also had them narrated by different people, which I thought was really good, because with such a variety of voices in the different stories, if it was just read by one person, it wouldn't work. Plus, also, a lot of them are stories from, you know, different places, and therefore you want to have a voice that's also reflective of that place. Otherwise, that's not going to work, and it's not going to fit with what the mission is of the book. So I thought that was really good. It's not a separate narrator for every story, but it's a number of different narrators for the different stories. And I thought they were really good. They both made you think and were just very entertaining and great to listen to. So yes, that's definitely something I'm going to go back to and listen to even more of them. Well, listen to them over again, not even more of them.
Yeah.
So yes, fully recommend.
So my next one, I think it's the first fictional title on my list. I do actually really enjoy listening to fiction. I think
it wasn't a criticism. Don't
year,
worry.
yeah. It's just I was just looking at my list and just realised it's mostly non-fiction. I do really enjoy listening to fiction. It's just this year, I think, for some reason, a lot of the stuff I've really enjoyed has been non-fiction. So my next one is The Thief by Megan Whalen Turner. So this is a part of the Queen's Thief series. It's a fantasy series, and these books are just they're fantastic. The entire audiobook series has been really good, and I think I chose this one is that for the reason if I'd perhaps picked this up in a library on a bookshop, I might not have gotten all the way through it, but the strength of the narration by Steve West is fantastic. So Steve West manages to imbue the characters with a lot of charisma, and then he makes them kind of like sound really cool, even though they're kind of occasionally some of the dialogue, you know, in fantasy stories, especially if it's set kind of a long time ago, sometimes the dialogue can be a little bit Lord of the Ringsy. I don't know if there's a bit of it. So, but he manages to kind of imbue with a lot of charisma, makes all the characters sound really cool. It's the story is. Oh, I can't give too many spoilers into the story.
No.
Okay, so it's basically about Jen and this group of. So there's basically 3 warring countries, and two people from one of the countries are carrying out a secret mission to try and steal this artifact that's located in another country, and they kidnap this thief from underneath the palace cells to help them steal this artifact. And that's kind of as far as I'm willing to go into what the plot details are. It's every book in the series is fantastically written. Every one it kind of goes off in an unexpected direction. So that's the other thing that I quite enjoyed about the book is kind of sometimes with sci-fi and fantasy, it can be quite tropey and filled with cliches, and you can kind of tell what's going to be happening next.
Yeah.
That's not really, especially after the first book, that's not really the case, because you never really know what's going to happen. There's the other thing that I really enjoyed about this is that it's quite light fantasy, in terms of supernatural elements are very light touch.
Yeah.
So it's mostly about the human drama and the sacrifice and the trauma, and kind of each character trying to convince another character what the best way forward is, or trying to undermine them or convince them or threaten them. So that's the other thing that I really, really enjoyed about it. It's kind of an award-winning fantasy book as well. So that's another one that I really enjoyed as well. So I think that's 5 from me. 1, 2.
I'm sure I've only done 4.
Okay, so do you want to do your 5th one?
Sure, I will do.
Yeah.
Try and find out which one your 5th one is.
Yeah.
So my fifth one was, I saw it recommended on a book YouTuber channel, specifically in the audiobook format.
Yeah.
So I thought, yeah, I'll definitely give that a go. So it's My Name is Leon by Kit Dewar, and it's read by Lenny Henry, and it is brilliant. It is, my kind of one-line description of it is, it's heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time. So Leon, the main character, is a young boy, and he goes through some really difficult things, and people let him down, and things let him down, but also people are there for him, and people help him, and it's a really, really emotional book, and I got very nervous listening to it, that the worst was going to happen, and so happy when it didn't, and various things like that. I always, when it started off, I wasn't too sure about it, because I always find things where adults are voicing children, both when writers write children's voices and when narrators are doing a child's voice, I often find that quite uncomfortable. I often don't think it fully hits the nail on the head, or gets the age right, or seems, sometimes it feels like it's too simplistic, or sometimes it just doesn't feel right. So when I first listened, obviously there's quite a lot of that in the beginning of it, and I wasn't quite sure, but I was definitely proven wrong. I feel like I'm not explaining it very well,
Yeah.
but partly because I don't want to spoil it, a bit
Yeah.
like you had, because there's things that happen that when you first start it, you might have on the blurb, because the blurb often does spoil the first half of the book, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So you might not, but I think it's important that you go on that journey with him. But I definitely agree with, this YouTuber who recommended it in the audio, because Lenny Henry's reading is fantastic, and his range of both voices and accents is incredible. I did all this talking up his Dark Materials for having different actors for the parts, but the fact that he does all of those parts, and they're so well distinguished, and yet so full of their own individualness, is just phenomenal. So yes, written incredibly, and I'm sure if I read it as a book, I would also have been, really enthralled by it, really heartbroken, and then heartwarmed by it, but definitely glad that I had the audio, and would fully recommend the audio to anyone who's interested in it. It is really, really good. It's a hard listen, and I wasn't
Yeah.
necessarily in the best place when I started it. So, but I'm also glad that I had it then. It may have made me feel worse, but I think it came at the right time for me as well.
That sounds like a really interesting read. Was
Yeah.
the title of the book again?
So My Name is Leon.
My Name is Leon. Okay, so
Yeah.
I found the book that I missed off my
Oh,
list.
okay.
Okay, so it's again, I think it's quite similar to My Name is Leon. It's educated by Tara Westover, as narrated by Julie Whelan, and Tara it's her biography of her and her family, and she basically grew up, I think, if I remember correctly, is in a really hardcore sect of Mormonism. So like her family are basically doomsday preppers. They live up on this isolated mountain. Her dad is kind of really suspicious of the United States government. He doesn't enroll them into school. He hasn't got birth certificates for them. So they're basically homeschooled. She's basically, and her brothers are basically homeschooled for the first part of their lives. And it's a little bit like Dadland. Educated kind of made me realize that truth really is stranger than fiction, because her family's come out and said some of the allegations made in the book aren't true. But even if some of them are true, it's just kind of, if someone had written this as a story, you would have thought, well, you're going a little bit too far there, mate. That's not realistic. It's a really harrowing, hard read at times. It covers themes of kind of familial abuse, kind of the this idea of leaving your religion as well is also kind of covered in the book. And there were times where I had to stop listening because it was getting just a little bit too upsetting, what was happening. So again, kind of, please be forewarned that there is quite a lot of heavy material in the book. But again, it's kind of, I don't want to say bittersweet, but, along with the horror, there are moments of kind of hope and the possibility of a better future and redemption. So that again is a really, really powerful story, wonderfully narrated by Julia, who really manages to capture all the vulnerability and angst and anxiety that Tara must have been feeling as she was kind of going through these events in her life. So yeah, that's another kind of fantastic non-fiction audiobook that's on my list as well.
Wow, yeah. And we did well to sort of finish on two sort of similar ones for rounding it up.
Yeah. So I was just wondering, what are you listening to at the moment?
Oh, I'm actually between ones at the moment, though what I am doing is slightly different. So because I'm trying to learn Norwegian, and I got this book called Short Stories in Norwegian. It's sort of designed for adult learners. And I decided I would invest in the audiobook as well, because my listening isn't quite as good as my reading. So I've been dipping in and out of that one, but I'm currently looking for my next proper one to sit down and listen to. What about you?
Do you mind me asking why are you trying to?
Why am I trying to learn Norwegian? Would you like the long answer or the short answer? I'll blast through the long answer. So because it starts very. I ended up seeing this it wasn't Instagram, but it was sort of imagine an Instagram sort of photo that was talking about the book publishing culture in Iceland, where that's not Norway, but we get there. And sort of saying about, it had some facts and figures about the numbers of how big it was, but also kind of the culture around it of sort of getting books on Christmas Eve and stuff like that. And I really loved it. And I even knew back then that I wanted to get into publishing. So I ended up then becoming kind of obsessed with Iceland. And I've tried learning Iceland for a while. I was learning Russian as well alongside that. But I started trying to learn Icelandic, but there's so little out there. So I didn't get massively far with it. I kind of dipped in, dipped out. But then last summer, my partner's family were going to Norway and they asked if I would like to go with them. So I was like, oh, yeah, no, that'd be amazing, obviously. Definitely, please. And I was like, you know what, I'll do a bit of, because I used Duolingo for my Russian. I was like, that's really good. And Norwegian is on there, even though Icelandic isn't. But they're kind of similar related languages. I'll give it a go to try and learn a bit before I go. So I did that, and I basically haven't stopped doing it since. I really loved it. I'm dedicating more of my effort into learning that. But then also kind of in tangent with that, so it was definitely because of the holiday, but a friend of mine from uni is actually from Norway. So it was nice there because it means that we can talk like that, but in both kind of nice for our friendship that we can do something together, but then also easier to learn it if I actually have someone to practice with. So yes, it sort of started off as learning Icelandic, and then through various different things it's ended up with learning Norwegian. So yeah.
That's quite interesting because I'm currently applying for a job at a Norwegian company.
No way.
At the moment. So yeah, kind of typical European things. They are asking for like native English speaker. English speakers is kind of a writing job for a video game company out there.
Wow.
So
that sounds
it's going to be
cool.
remote, but yes, So that's quite interesting. What am I listening to? So I am listening to the audiobook of Shuggie Baines, which was, I think it was the Booker Prize winner this year.
Yeah.
And it's usually when I'm listening to audiobooks, I put them on and then I'll maybe do something else, and maybe job applications or housework. With this particular one, it demands your full attention. If you know what I mean. So it's been really, really good so far. It's a long old book though. It's a long old book. I'm not too sure if I'm going to be able to finish it before the library asks for it back. So it's
Oh,
I think 16 hours long.
yeah.
So it's a long old book, and I'm about a quarter of the way through, and I've got 4 days to finish it off. So I'm currently listening to it on kind of 2.5 times
Oh,
speed,
yeah.
which I think is, yes, which is kind of, I
Not
think,
quite
maybe
the same
losing,
experience, but
not quite the same
yeah.
experience, but yeah. But the other thing about, when you get, I don't know if you do this, but when I'm reading a book I really enjoy, I do, I don't savor it. I just kind of rush through the
Mm,
lines so I can just get to the next bit. So
yeah.
maybe, yeah, I might need to kind of purchase it and
Yeah, invest
listen to
in.
it at a more leisurely pace
Mm.
that it kind of deserves.
Yeah, it's interesting that there was a module that I did at uni that was about kind of researching readers and various different things, but one of the parts of it was talking about kind of when do people speed up and when do they slow down at points with that, which I thought was really quite interesting. But obviously that's kind of physically when you've got the words in front of you, as opposed to kind of how you speed up the audio. Though I know I definitely did want to speed up My Name is Leon at points to find out what was going to happen because I was too
Yeah,
stressed. So yeah, but also
yeah,
interesting what you're saying about doing other stuff while you're listening,
yeah,
because I'm this is part of the reason why I'm kind of behind with not currently listening to one at the moment, because I try and avoid, unless it's something that I've heard before, I try and
yeah,
avoid doing other stuff while I'm doing it because I know my brain will wander. So I normally end up trying to sit down, and even though I feel like I should be doing something else with my eyes or my hands or something like that, I tell myself no, because if you're reading a book, you'd just be sat here reading the book. So it's the same with
yeah,
audio, but sometimes I need reminding of that. But yeah,
yeah.
normally try and do it separate.
Like,
So it's interesting how different people do it.
yeah, for me, the other thing that I did, especially during early on in lockdown, was just put an audio book on and just go for a walk for like a couple of
Yeah,
hours,
yeah,
and that's also quite a good way to
yes, definitely. I'm with
to,
you on that one.
I hate that word, but to consume them. But
Yes.
that came to mind. But yeah, and the thing, yeah, that's quite a nice way to listen to them
Hmm.
as well. So we've been going for about 40 minutes, so I think that's quite good.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, guys, so that's kind of the pilot episode done. I hope you enjoy it, and yeah, we'll be hopefully doing more of these in the future.
Sounds good.
Okay, guys, let's say bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.